And today we're going to make a worship service. First thing we need is something to put the worship service in. We'll call this a sanctuary. And I want to start with the primary ingredients for the worship service we're having today. I think we'll begin with some readings. Here's 3 different colors: Old Testament reading, New Testament reading, and the Gospel. Let's put them in and whip them up a bit. Always need to have the readings brought in together. You can't just have one, you know. It's always good to have a blend of the readings. Ah, yes. Mix them up a bit. Ah, yes. Now, along with the readings, we should have Eucharist. Very important to have the Eucharist as a part of the service. So, here we go. Now, along with that, a very important part of the service is the sermon. Sermons have to be well prepared, so it takes a bit of work to get a sermon ready. Kind of grinding it out, you know how I mean? There we go. Add that all together. Then we'll just mix this up a bit. Now we have our primary ingredients. You can stop there. Now we're ready to add something with flavor. How about some music? I like music of different kinds, so we'll call this blended worship. Oh, hard to get up. Sometimes it needs to be chopped up a little bit. So you got some music over here, some music over there. Ah, yes. Take out the bad parts. And then chop it right up. Always good to have the right tools, by the way, when you're making worship service. Good sharp knife. There we go. Put that right in. And music of another kind. Already chopped that up. That should be good. Then, I think perhaps we ought to have a couple of testimonies. Yes? We'll just throw them right in. This one's got some bad spots. Testimonies are that way, you know. But we'll just bring it in. Testimonies. And, of course, some silence. Always good to have a little silence in a worship service. See that? I think we're ready to mix all this up then. Oh, one moment though. We need to add a few more things. A touch of gestures. Yes, a little bit of bowing the knee. Oh, a little bit of raising of the hands. And a little bit of crossing oneself. Not too much of that. And you spread these gestures all around. Making sure, just sprinkle it all over the surface. And, of course, we've got just a little bit of this sweetener, which we could think of that as some of the little delightful moments in the service. Art. Yeah, something like that. All right. That's good. And finally, the Holy Spirit. Can't have enough of the Holy Spirit, the fat of the service. I've already melted this up a little bit, so we'll put it in. Ooh, yes. A bit of the Holy Spirit. And then all of this gets mixed up together, and then we'll put it in this pan which has been oiled. More Holy Spirit. And so it all gets put into this pan. All right, now we're ready to put the pan in the oven. We've chopped things, and we've ground things, and we've mixed things, and it's all together, sprinkled a bit of this, the gestures on the top. Now we're ready to put it in the oven and heat it up. That's the way worship services are, you know. You need a little heat to get things to work right. There you go. Put it in there. Keep it that way for a little bit and let's see what happens. So as you can tell, we're back to talking about worship services again. I know I said we begin to move in these last lectures toward talking about a worship life as just in addition to a worship service, but we needed to come back and talk specifically about the means of worship. Last lecture was on the means of grace, those practices or relationships or attitudes and such that mediate between the worship service and the worship life. Today, we want to talk specifically about means of worship. How do we do worship? It's kind of techniques, or means of grace, that kind of thing. God will work through this way we do something in the worship service. Now, if you remember last lecture, I talked about means being like a way we do things. The jar that couldn't open, and I took that jar opener out and I opened it. That was a means. But when I got to thinking about the worship service as a whole and the different means of grace, the image that came to my mind was a recipe, cooking. And so we'll use the idea of cooking and recipe as a way of thinking about a worship service. First, you have the ingredients. And just as you saw in the little demonstration, there were lots of different ingredients that go together to make up a worship service. There's the music, different kinds of music. There's silence, sound and silence. There are visual things. I didn't talk much about the visual in the demonstration, but there's the way you decorate a room. There's things that might be hanging. There's sculptures. There are all kinds of things. Testimonies, readings, bodily movements, gestures, processionals, recessionals, these sorts of things. Movement, dance, the images that you have in your mind, during a service are part of the worship service itself. Smells. We could have added a little incense here and there along with our gestures to sprinkle over the top. Touch. Taste. Do you have wafers when you do communion? Or do you have real bread? The taste is something. Sermons, responses, so on. Each of these are different ingredients that make up a worship service. And when you're planning a worship service, or if you're involved in putting together worship services, one way you might think about it is, here's all these ingredients. So that's the first component, is to think about ingredients. Next, you want to ask, well, how do we put these ingredients together? Now, if you remember, there was chopping and mixing and spreading and sprinkling and lots of different things. And the same is true with the ingredients of a worship service. Some things you just want to introduce with little doses. The church isn't used to it. It's a little spicy. We just want a little dose added into the service. Some, you want things blended together. You want music over here, music over there, music over here. Some things should be repeated. Every week we repeat the creed. This is what it means to have a worship service. And so repetition is a part of the use of the ingredients. Certain doses you have for things. You notice we had the sermon and the readings and the communion and the Eucharist. Those were the primary ingredients. Other people might think of other elements to be primary ingredients. If you have a charismatic Pentecostal worship service, you're going to think of music and worship. You're going to think of the sermon and the word. And you're going to think of a ministry time, a response. And those will be your three primary ingredients. What are called like the macro rites. And then the micro rites, prophecy or prayers of healing or speaking in tongues, or those micro rites get sprinkled around in the midst of these macro rites. And that's the way it would work. We discussed that earlier when we talked about the order of worship. So the ingredients are used differently and in different orders and in different amounts, depending on what the kind of worship service that you're creating. So that's the use of the ingredients. Now then, in terms of dosages, there's these factors that shape our common prayer or our common worship service. And I just want to mention how these factors work. And they're like the amounts of things you put in or how you put them in. There's the scale of a gathering. Is it a small gathering or is it a large gathering? The worship service will change depending on the size of the gathering. Pay attention to that factor. There is also the degree of structure in the gathering. Now remember, one of the things that we can talk about in terms of this structure is some things can be structured really meticulously. Orthodox worship services, down to the words and the very gestures that the person up front might be making. Or you might have like a Quaker service where it's completely open until the Holy Spirit speaks. Or I usually call that a quiet open, is a Quaker, or a noisy open, which might be a really Pentecostal service, where anything can happen and it's quite noisy. The other thing you think of in one of these factors is the target population. Is the target population the regular, mature members of this congregation, or are we targeting visitors? Or is there some measure of, we want to make sure it's friendly to visitors, but we're not trying to target the visitors? So, and all of these, there's a spectrum between small and large, open and tight, visitors or members, or however in between you're thinking of it. Another thing that you might talk about then is like an orientation or association of the form. Sometimes we can use the word traditional or contemporary, but that's a very Western American kind of way of talking about it, because tradition is very different in different cultures. And so it's just what kinds of associations you're thinking of that you have with whatever form you're using. And that might be another spectrum, another factor that you add to this whole thing. And then another one, you've got the confrontation of the sights and the sounds and the sensory experience. Some things can be very loud. The sights are loud, very colorful, very bold kinds of paintings or sculptures. In the room, the colors are loud, or it might be very subdued, very tastefully quiet. It depends on what you want to create in these things. So these are all kinds of different factors that shape what a worship gathering looks like. You got the ingredients, your use of the ingredients, and then some of these other factors. Another set of factors we can talk about are things like your preparation time. How much time do you put into preparation? Some people say, don't prepare a sermon, wait for the Holy Spirit to speak, and let it go. Others, no, we're going to speak what the Holy Spirit says, and we're going to listen to the Holy Spirit before we give the message. So there's the amount of the building and the surroundings of the building are another factor that affects a worship service. The focus or the tone. Different congregations tend to have a different focus or tone in their worship service. Some it will be high praise. Others it will be repentance. Others it will be intimacy. Others it will be a proclamation orientation. Different kinds of congregations, different kinds of traditions will emphasize different tones throughout a service. Get to know the tone which is communicated in your worship service. Another question you want to ask about when you're thinking of planning worship service is congregational participation. How many people participate and how do they participate? Are you expecting a wide range? Are you expecting testimonies? What about that bad spot in the apple? Is that okay? What kinds of participation do you want in the kinds of worship services that you're trying to communicate? Because how you arrange for the participation also communicates in itself something of the gospel. Okay? Leadership visibility, that's another factor. How visible, who are the leaders, how do you have them present? Music, sermon, some of these other kinds of things. So this is the recipe, namely the ingredients, how you put them together, the other factors, the heating up of or the mixing, or all of these different ways that things get put together to create what you have as a worship service. Now, what you end up with when it's all done, what you end up with is a certain product. And interesting enough, the worship service products come in some basic forms. Each one is slightly different, but yet there's some forms that can be kind of recognized. Liturgical. Your strict Roman Catholic, your Orthodox services, the High Church Anglican services, the Anglo-Catholic services, they will look liturgical. Then you'll have what I would call moderate liturgical or low church liturgical. Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterians, they have a form, they follow a form. Some words are used during the services, some antiphons or things like that. It's not as detailed. Then you will find another form that I call traditional evangelical. Things like Baptists, evangelical free, covenant churches. There will be a form, and usually it's a mixture of a Reformation form and then things that happened during the revival movements in the 1900s. So altar calls are a little more common, special music in certain ways, and the sermon is highlighted in a particular kind of way. And you'll get this format of a general Reformation evangelical service. Then you'll move, again, another form that has happened and more recently is what I would call contemporary evangelical services, like a Calvary Chapel. Largely, worship music, announcements, some other kinds of things, and then a sermon and a response to the sermon. That's the basic format of that. You'll find emergent or emerging, I don't know, whatever form you want to use, where people are doing arts, there may be drama, who knows, all kinds of things that people are exploring, a mixture of old and new creative ventures in producing worship services. Dialogue, sermons, different things like that. Then you move towards a seeker service, the early Willow Creek services, where there was actually very little formal worship together. The worship together happened somewhere else. You had performances. You had a very short, easy to understand message oriented at the seeker. And so you've got that kind of a seeker orientation, and the service might be that way. You could have another form is like a Pentecostal or charismatic service. I've already mentioned the format of worship singing, sermon, and then response or ministry time, where there's oftentimes in the midst of those macro rites a lot of free-flowing activity that goes on. Prophecies may come, times for prayer may come, seasons of waiting, seasons of public praying. Lots of different things can happen in an open Pentecostal service. Another environment would be a home fellowship. And there you've got a different kind of environment. And the amount of sharing, the kind of sermon that's preached, the way singing is done, the presence or absence of children, how that all works. That's true in all these other ones as well. We didn't even talk about how families participate. But anyway, out of the ingredients, out of the mixing of the ingredients and the inclusion of all of these different factors, small versus large, open versus tight, visitor versus member, traditional, contemporary, loud or quiet, all of these things produce a worship service product. And those products can come in some pretty basic forms. It might be helpful as you plan worship service, as you think about what you're doing, is to think of these forms and what are they accomplishing. And let me remind you that worship services have both a doxological function and a pedagogical or formational function. Worship is about God. It is about bringing praise to God. It's offering ourselves in total devotion to God. Worship service is also about us receiving from one another, receiving from God. In the midst of this gathering together, we rehearse and we renew our total devotion to God in a worship service. And so what you want to ask when you prepare worship services, what is the blend of these things? How are we trying to do this? What are we trying to do? And then to think about the ingredients, how they're mixed together, what kind of general product or form that it comes out to be. What means do you want to use to accomplish what purpose? The means of a worship service are these things, the ingredients and the processes, that then produce a particular product. And ask yourself that way. Another component you might think of too, I know our church where I attend, we have a lot of introverts. And so there's some things we're not going to do so much, just simply because most of our people won't volunteer to give testimonies every week, or these kind of things. The testimony has to come in the potluck, not in the worship service. So you want to think about things like even the personalities of your people, values or predispositions. So that's how it works. And so finally, what I want to do is close with just one word of wisdom. If you're going to be preparing a worship service, if you're going to do a menu of worship service, producing this product for the consumer culture of the people around us, what do you do? Well, my encouragement is know the gospel and know the people. Know the gospel. What is it that we are trying to communicate? What aspects of the all things new gospel are appropriate here and now? And indeed, what aspects of the all things new gospel have we been neglecting? So have a full view of the gospel and be able to present that over time. Also, know your people. Know the culture. Know the immediate culture, the people inside. What kinds of ingredients will help them right here in this congregation. But you also might want to know a little bit more about the community surrounding you. If we want to welcome the people surrounding us as well as in us, what kinds of things do we need to be sensitive to? What cultural sensitivities? What kind of music? So on and so forth. How do we begin to both reach what's in and reach what surrounds? And that's more of the doxological, but the formational function. But indeed, I really do think that when we communicate the whole gospel, it's both doxological and formational at the same time. And voila! Here we are! A little mixing, a little heating up, a couple of hours, and look at this! A worship service all ready for consumption! Are you being fed in your worship service? I certainly am. Well, this is Evan B. Howard, and bon appetit!